Good evening again. Welcome to Sinai Temple's Yom Hashoa Commemoration. I'm Rabbi Erez Sherman from Sinai Temple. To begin our program, we call upon our senior rabbi of Sinai Temple, Rabbi David Wolpe, to begin our program. Good evening.
For all of us, it is impossible to put into words the unimaginable losses that our people and the world endured in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. And this is one of the reasons that a reaction to the Shoah has sometimes been one of silence, because unlike words which are limited, silence is infinite. And the loss not only of life, but of dreams, of love, of abilities, of talents, of possibilities, it is limitless. We cannot begin to imagine, knowing even from the achievements and lives of those who were fortunate enough, courageous enough, strong enough to survive, knowing that one can only begin a lifetime of imagination about what has been lost. And the cruelty and the evil that this earth has seen in the desire to wipe out an entire people and their history and their future. At the same time, on Yom HaShoah, we are mindful of those, too few by far, but still acknowledged and thanked, who did help, who did rescue Jews, who did hide them, who did shield them, who reminded us that in every situation in life, goodness is still possible, that there are angels in this world, just as human beings can turn into demons. We light candles tonight because the Torah tells us that the human soul is God's candle. And all over the world, there will be candles lit for all the souls that were taken from us, that did not have the possibility of seeing their lives to its natural close. And we remember the suffering, the pain, the isolation, the loneliness, the cruelty, the witnessing of the death of people that you loved and cared for. So we are torn. Our hearts will never be able to be mended, because once you learn of what happened to the Jewish people, once you begin to read and understand and see, you recognize that no words are adequate, no memorial sufficient, no tears copious enough to encompass the sadness and the reality of the loss. And yet we close with hope, because the Jewish people still did survive with all the losses and all the pain. And we do still remember day after day and year after year. So we continue. We continue in memory, and we continue in possibility, never for a moment losing sight of what was lost, and never for a moment allowing those who wished to destroy and to crush our spirit and our people to claim a posthumous victory. Am Yisrael Chai, the nation and spirit of Israel, is still alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Wolpe. This evening, we are going to hear from members of our congregation and community of Sinai Temple. children of those survivors. Our good friend Anna Tenenblatt just said before we started this broadcast, she said, I'm always fascinated and surprised to hear of who within my own community are Holocaust survivors. This is all of our stories. On my desk sits these pictures. Thankfully, I can show everybody. But this one right here was taken in 2005. It's a large stone with high school students. It's when I went to Poland for the first time and walked through the death camp Treblinka. My grandparents had come to this country before the war, but I knew that many in that town of Ostrowiec met their last breath in Treblinka. And so I found that stone that had the town of my grandfather, Ostrowiec, and I took a picture of it because I didn't know if I would ever be back in Poland. Fast forward to moving out in California in 2009, there were a bunch of teenagers that were about to go to Poland. And I said, before they go, when you go to that camp called Treblinka, here's a map and take a picture next to that stone. And that's exactly what they did in this picture. But as Rabbi Wolpe mentioned, we end with hope. Because next to that picture of Treblinka are those same young people right here, standing in the city of Akko in the land of Israel. Because the Talmud tells us when the rabbis went to Israel for the first time, they literally rolled in the dust and kissed those walls of Akko. So on my desk as I get to work every morning, I see those two pictures. One of young people walking in and walking out of Treblinka. And two, those same young people. Those same young people, our future, our hope. Kissing the walls of Akko. Kissing the walls of the land of Israel. Cantor Feldman begins with an opening song of Yom HaShoah.
Born in Hungary, Hannah Sanesh emigrated to Israel at the age of 18. During World War II, she volunteered for a secret mission with the British Air Force and parachuted into Yugoslavia to make contact with the resistant forces and to help rescue Jews. Hannah Sanesh became one of the most prominent composers and poets of the state of Israel, and her song, Eli, Eli, my God, may these things never end, the sand and the sea, the oceans roar, the sparkling skies, and of course the prayer of man, has become an anthem to Am Yisrael. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer le'olam, hachol ve'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, merak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam, hachol ve'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, merak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam.
First speaker tonight, we call upon Sharon Gitman. Sharon?
Hi, good evening. My name is Sharon Gitman. I'm moving from my notes, I'm sorry. Thank you, Rabbi Wolpe, Rabbi Sherman, Pastor Feldman, and fellow guests for allowing me to participate in tonight's meaningful Yom HaShoah program. Tonight we commemorate those lost in the Holocaust and those who survived the Holocaust so that they can tell their stories of survival. I am a daughter of two Holocaust survivors. My father, Henry, also known as Enyek or Henushki of blessed memory, passed 40 years ago, was from Lodz, Poland. He survived the Lodz ghetto and labor camps with his brother Paul. He lost his parents, a brother, and a sister. My mother, Doris, also known as Dora, Dorka, or Dorchu, from Sosnowiec, Poland, recently celebrated her 93rd birthday. She was 11 years old when the Germans marched into her town in September 1939. She also lost both parents, two brothers, and a sister. She and her sister Hella survived both labor and concentration camps. I think Holocaust survivors are an incredible spirited group of people that did not let the horrific crimes of humanity they endured interfere with living their lives to the fullest for the years following the Holocaust. When Rabbi Sherman asked me to speak tonight to address the meaning of Yom HaShoah today, I hesitated. Speaking is not my personal strength, it's not a personal strength of mine. However, I felt the need to participate this evening because this past year has been difficult than years preceding it. With COVID-19, the rise of shootings and violence, the rise of anti-Semitism and racial hatred, and the January 6th insurrection, I feel as if a dark cloud has been hovering over us. This has had an impact not only on me, but on my mother as well. She has been increasingly depressed and agitated by the events of the January 6th insurrection and the rhetoric leading up to it. For as long as I can remember, my mother would say, "It can happen again." Or she would say, "You know, people are smart to know right from wrong, but you never know when your neighbor can change on you." I understood this more after January 6th. My mother, as many other survivors do, is always willing to speak and teach both children and adults about her experiences. For years, I've heard stories from fellow survivors as well. Each story is amazing in and of itself. Details may differ as each person suffered tremendous hardships and loss during the Holocaust, but each displayed courage and tenacity to survive. My mother jumped off a moving train to escape as it passed her hometown. She was captured, she was punished, and placed in Buchenwald, which is known primarily to be a men's camp. Another time, when working in a kitchen, she would hide hot potatoes under her clothing to bring back to the barracks to share food with fellow prisoners. Over time, the vividness of horrors our parents experienced will diminish as we lose those who lived through it. We must make sure the future understands what happened and does not forget. So, when asked, what does Yom HaShoah mean to me today? It's a day to remember those who perished, a day to be grateful that we can still hear and read about survivor stories and have the ability to use their stories as tools to educate people as a way to stop the spread of anti-Semitism, hatred, racism, and bigotry, with the hope that one day the dark clouds will pale in comparison to the sunshine.
Thank you, Sharon. And I believe, Sharon, you have a candle there that you're going to light as well, correct?
I do.
Great.
Hold on a sec.
No worries. Enter sings for us, Eufen Pripicic.
Eufen Pripicic, On the Hearth, is a Yiddish song. And the song's about a rabbi teaching his young students the Aleph Bet. By the end of the 19th century, it was one of the most popular songs of the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe. And as such, it's a major musical memory of pre-Holocaust Europe. The song is still sung in Jewish kindergartens. Häufen Pripetschek brennt auf Feierel und in Stub ist heiß und der Rebelle kleiner Kinderlach dem Aleph Beis und der Rebelle kleiner Kinderlach dem Aleph Beis Zetsche Kinderlach gedentsche Teiere was ihr lernt da sag schon noch einmal und Tage noch einmal kommet's Aleph O sag schon noch einmal und Tage noch einmal kommet's Aleph O.
Honor us with the lighting of the second candle and sharing her story, Marcy Maneker. Good evening, Marcy.
Good evening. Thank you. We are each born into a story that influences who we become. My upbringing included my mom's history. After Kristallnacht, where my mom watched from her family's apartment window in Leipzig, Germany, the burning of prayer books and prayer shawls in front of the synagogue across her street, my grandparents put my mother on a kinder transport to the safety of England. Great Britain took in 10,000 Jewish children from Germany, Austria, and other countries to save Jewish children's lives. At age 8, her parents said, "You'll go and have a great vacation. We'll join you in 2 weeks." That was the last time my mother saw her parents. In the following 8 years, she was moved through 10 different locations. After the war, my mom moved to the United States to her only living uncle. Throughout her childhood, my mom didn't like thinking about her past. As she put it, she put a wall up around herself. Questions about her life were met with refusal to discuss what had happened to her. Not until the 1990s, after my mother attended a survivors reunion, did she begin to answer questions about her story. After she became a grandmother, she gradually began to tell her story more publicly. She volunteered at the Holocaust Memorial Center of Detroit, first as a docent and eventually as a speaker. My mom recently celebrated her 90th birthday, but to this day, she struggles with not knowing the details of her parents' story. We know her father was murdered in a concentration camp, but her mom's story ends after an escape to Budapest and then to Salonika, Greece. Growing up as a child of a kinder transport survivor is the sadness of knowing my mom felt abandoned, even if it was to save her life. Growing up as a child of a Holocaust survivor is the awareness of my mom's guilt from surviving the horrors of the concentration camps and avoiding them. Growing up as a child of a survivor is the haunting feeling that at every exhibit or book or movie on the Holocaust, she's always looking for her missing mother. My mom has never stopped wondering. Growing up as a child of a survivor means struggling between wanting to stop listening to painful stories and simultaneously recognizing the moral obligation of needing to listen to keep the memory alive. We are still here, and we will never forget.
Marcy lights the second candle. Cantor continues the partisan song. Zog nit echmol.
Zognit Kainmol, a Yiddish song, became the anthem of the survivors of the Shoah. Never say that you are going your last way. Although the skies filled with lead cover blue days, our promised hour will soon come. Our marching steps ring out. We are here. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Himmeln bleiene verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau. Es wird ab heut an unser Trott mir seien da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau. Es wird ab heut an unser Trott mir seinen da.
The honor of sharing her story and lighting the third candle, we call upon Deborah Oppenheimer. Good evening, Deborah.
Good evening, Rabbi Sherman. Thank you for having me here today. My immediate and extended family spanned many of the experiences of the Holocaust, including my mother, who was also sent away on the Kindertransport at the age of 11, and whose parents were killed at Belzec concentration camp. And my father, who lost many of his immediate family in Bavaria, Germany. He escaped with his parents and sister to New York, enlisted in the American Army at the age of 19, helped liberate Nordhausen concentration camp, and served at D-Day +5. I'm proud to descend from that lineage of people who embodied the most estimable of human values and instilled in me a deep feeling for the Jewish traditions. It's why it's important to me to belong to a congregation, and I'm glad to have gotten to know some of the rabbis here. I have a great attachment to the survivor community. I feel more deeply when I'm in their presence, and I marvel at their resilience and all that we can learn from them. I have gratitude for all I have, and I feel a responsibility to give back. I try to honor those who are saved, and when we light these candles, I think of those who were killed. There's nothing like getting to hear survivors speak, but I've tried to do my part by spending the last 20 years speaking to survivors, groups, classrooms, and congregations, helping to tell the stories of the Holocaust and the Kindertransport in particular. I've served 2 terms as a White House appointee to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Council in Washington, D.C., and I've had the privilege of interacting with and visiting Holocaust institutions all over the world. Being the child of survivors has made me more attuned to the loss of rights, atrocities, and genocides happening today, as well as the plight of children separated from their families in foster care and at borders and in refugee camps. These are children who suffer for no fault of their own from decisions made by adults. I encourage people to ask their loved ones to tell them their stories. My mother never did, and my father was quite reticent about telling his. I implore people to be sure that the artifacts and mementos from those who survived the Holocaust do not get thrown away. They have value and will help to tell the story when the survivors are no longer here. I regret the coming of that day because they've enriched our world tremendously. There will come a time when these mementos, museums, testimonies, books, and films are all that carries on to tell the stories. So on this day, and quite often, I think of the obligation to not be a bystander. I think about a quote from Sarah Bloomfield, the director from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She said the Kindertransport was a tiny glimmer of hope during an enormous catastrophe. That it happened is cause for hope. That it was so tiny is cause for concern. There were 1.5 million children killed in the Holocaust. 10,000 of them were rescued by the Kindertransport. Of those 10,000, 2 went on to win the Nobel Prize, Arno Penzias and Walter Kohn. The loss is incalculable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my candle.
Yep, Deborah will light the candle, and then the cantor will sing Ani Ma'amin, a song of hope.
Based on the 12th of Rambam, Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, Ani Ma'amin, be'emunah shlema, be'viyat HaMashiach, ve'af al pi sheyitmamea im kol zeh, achake lo bechol yom sheyavo. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, and though he tarry, I will wait daily for his coming. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, be'emunah shlema, be'emunah shlema, be'viyat beviat HaMashiach ani mamin. Beviat HaMashiach, beviat HaMashiach ani mamin.
For our fourth candle, we'll hear from Sinai Temple member Abe Noble, and then we will watch a powerful video, a virtual choir from England recorded last year at the beginning of the pandemic called Never Again.
My name is Abe Noble. My parents are Leon and Helen Noble, both from Poland and survivors of the Holocaust. Being the son of a Holocaust survivor, Yom HaShoah to me is not just a day to remember what happened in the Holocaust. My experience is not solely based on what I read or watched in a movie. I knew from a young age that my parents were different from other parents, not in a bad way, but in a way that reminded me of the permanent emotional scars they had suffered and how they managed to somehow forge ahead, start a family, and make the most out of life. As an example, when my daughters were young, we got them bunk beds so they could share a room together. But when my mom saw the bunk beds, she was horrified because it reminded her of the bunk beds in the concentration camp. Also, she refuses to this day to get in line at a buffet because it reminds her of the food rations at the camps. She went on to describe in vivid memory when the Nazis broke through the front door of their house and dragged everyone out, breaking up the family by forcing them to make two lines. The much older and very young were destined for the death camps, while the rest of the family that were fit for work were sent to labor camps. It was only later that she learned that nearly all of her family and friends were killed by the Nazis. Even in a labor camp, she described how close she was from being killed or sent to the death camps and how she managed to stay alive. You see, both of my parents were permanently robbed of their youth and without parents to help guide them. How they managed to survive, pick themselves up, and start anew under those horrific and barbaric conditions is beyond belief. It reminds me how lucky I am to even exist. I recognize this and see the wonder and beauty of the Holocaust survivors, how they relished at the ultimate response to Hitler, and that is to be fruitful and multiply by having children, grandchildren, and so on. It brought me joy to schmooze with my parents' survivor friends and listening to their stories with their unique and beautiful accent in a language that was a mishmash of English, Yiddish, Polish, and Hebrew all wrapped into one. But it makes me sad as most of these survivors are gone now. So we try to help those that are still with us, like my mother, and to continue to tell the story, to educate and keep their memory alive. For what they went through, that is the least that we can do. So now I will light the yahrzeit candle in memory of the beautiful Jewish souls that died at the Holocaust.
Thank you to Abe. And I know Helen, Abe, your mom is with us this evening, and our love to her and to your entire family as well. For our fifth candle, we call upon Anna Teneblet.
Thank you, Rabbi and Cantor. My family and Bill's family are from an area called Bukovina, a German-speaking area that was Austria-Hungary until after World War I, when it became Romania, and then after World War II, and today it's the Ukraine. On Simchat Torah 1941, my 16-year-old mother and her parents were chased out of their home into a ghetto area, and from there sent to a camp in the Ukraine called Transnistria. Within 3 months, my grandfather had died of typhoid. My mother and my grandmother managed to survive, and when they were liberated by the Russians, my grandmother said to her, "Pack up our things." And my mother said, "Are you crazy? What do we have, a few schmattes?" And my grandmother said, "As it noch seiner Welt, it man davon haben die Sachen." If the world continues, we'll need our things. This amazing, amazing resilience and tenacity sticks with me all the time. And even some level of optimism and practicality that it's shown. My mother is nearly 98 now, and she's forgotten most of the stories and most of the people. But this one still resonates with her, and she remembers it all the time, and she tells it to me often. I think it's an important lesson for us today to think about tomorrow and not just yesterday.
Next song that I will sing is a prayer. We say these words each time we are about to put the Torah back in the ark behind me here in Cone Chapel. May the Holy One be merciful to our fellow Jews who wander over sea and land, who suffer oppression and imprisonment. May God soon bring them relief from distress, deliver them from darkness to light, from subjugation to redemption. Amen. Acheinu kol Beit Yisrael, Acheinu kol Beit Yisrael, Hanetuni batzara, betzara uvashiv yaomni bein vayam, uvein bahayabasha. Hamakom Yerachem Alehem V'yotziei mitzara Levacha U'me'afel Aliora U'mishu Buli Geula Hashta Bagala U'bizman Karim Yalai ay ay la 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 ya la ya la la ya. For our sixth candle, we call upon Ashley Waterman.
I am the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. I had an incredibly close relationship with my grandmother, Frida. She shared her stories with me, stories that she could not bring herself to share with my father, her son. She wanted to protect him and give him a happy life, but of course he felt the sadness and the absence of extended family. I see and feel the intergenerational trauma. Her experiences have shaped me, but I did not have to live with them every day. And for that, I feel a great sense of responsibility to share them and to honor her memory. The constant backdrop of her experiences has deepened my sensitivity to the plight of others and strengthened my commitment to living my life in accordance with Jewish values. She taught me how to say, "Marry Jewish boy," before I could form a sentence, and I credit her with helping me to make the most important decision of my life, marrying my husband, Ben, and committing to living and raising our children in a rich Jewish home. She taught me perspective. When I'm cold and uncomfortable, I often think about the real cold that she endured in Poland. When I have blisters on my feet and I wish that I were wearing more comfortable shoes, I think about her forced labor in wooden shoes in the winter. She taught me strength. Beyond the soul-crushing heartache of losing her family, I learned of my grandmother's incredible physical and mental strength. She worked digging ditches with heavy wires and tools in an ammunition factory without goggles, and she lived with lice on herself for 4 years. She once had a toothache from a rotting tooth. Even at a young age, she had the wisdom to know that it could lead to life-threatening infection, so she somehow got a hold of pliers and asked a friend to pull it for her. She transcended all of this because even in her darkest days, she had faith and believed that the world could still be a beautiful place. I carry her strength in me every day. Whenever I'm faced with adversity, I remember what my grandmother endured. This inspires me, and it reminds me that I have the power to overcome the comparably trivial obstacles that are placed in front of me. My grandparents' incredible strength and will to survive made it possible for my family to have the life that we have today. I am the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. My children are the great-grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. We will always remember and will try our best to carry their strength.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to light a final candle before we do the Amalei Rachamim, the traditional memorial prayer, which will be chanted by the cantor. We recite this prayer for Yisker, the memorial prayer we just chanted on the 8th day of Passover. But right now the words change. Anashim, Nashim, B'taf. Men, women, and children of the house of Israel who were slaughtered, suffocated, and burned to ashes. We rise, if you are able, for the traditional memorial prayer, the Amalei Rachamim.
Rachamim, Shochein Bameromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Shechina, B'ma'alot Kedoshim Uteorim, Kezohar HaRagia, Mazhirim, Et Nishemot Kol Acheinu B'nei Yisrael, Anashim, Nashim, V'taf, Shenit Bechu, V'shenechnechu, V'shenisrefu, V'shenergu, B'gan Eden Tehi Menuchatam, Ana Ba'al HaRachamim, Hastirei B'seiter Kenafecha, Leolamim, Utzeror B'tzuror HaChaim, Et Nishmotehem, Adonai, Hu Nachalatam, Ve'yanuchu V'shalom, Al Mishkevotehem, Ve'nomar, Amen.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure. For the souls of all our brethren perished in the street, men, women, and children of the house of Israel who were slaughtered, suffocated, and burned to ashes. May their memory endure and inspire deeds of charity and goodness in our lives. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
The mourner's Kaddish that is recited is a bit different. Every few words, we, in between the Aramaic, the Hebrew, we recite the words of the camps where our loved ones perish.
Yit Gadal,
Auschwitz,
Veyit Kadash,
Lodz,
Shemei Rabbah,
Ponar,
Be'alma Divra Kirute,
Babi Yar,
Veyamlich Malchute,
Majdanek,
Bechayechon Uveyomechon,
Birkenau,
Uvechaye Dechol Beit Yisrael,
Kovno,
Ba'agala Uvizman Kariv,
Danauska,
Ve'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Ulalmei Almaya. Yitbarach Ve'yishtabach
Reisenstadt,
Ve'yitpa'ar Ve'yitromam
Buchenwald,
Ve'yitnaseh Ve'yithadar
Treblinka,
Ve'yit'aleh Ve'yithalal
Vilna,
Shemei Dekudsha
Bergen-Belsen,
Brich Hu Le'ela
Schaffhausen,
Min Kol Birchata Ve'shirata
Dachau,
Tush Bechata Ve'nechamata
Minsk,
Da'amiran Be'alma
Warsaw,
Ve'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya Ve'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom Bimromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'imru Amen.
May God who brings peace unto heavens, bring peace unto all of us gathered here tonight. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated. In just a moment, we're going to conclude our service with a song of hope, the nation of Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, the flag behind me. Several announcements and acknowledgements. It's hard to say thank you to participants in a program like this, but it really is Toda Rabbah, because without the stories that you shared of your parents and your families, we could not be part of that narrative. You know, many of the people on this, I don't like to say call, but program, it was several months ago when we had a programming meeting and we said, what are we doing for Yom HaShoah? And many of the people on that call who are here right now said, you know, I'm a child of a survivor, and I'm a child of a survivor, and I'm a child of a survivor. Gives me chills right now just thinking of that Zoom call several months ago. And from there, we gathered tonight. And we don't just share the stories of the past, but as we heard, we also begin to teach the future. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., I have the good fortune of speaking with Jory Epstein, a reporter for the Dallas Cowboys, but we're not going to talk about football. We're going to speak about her new memoir about Holocaust survivor Max Glaubin, who she met when she went on March of the Living as a 17-year-old. So if you would like to join that, it's tomorrow at 10 a.m. on our Sinai Temple YouTube. And then at 5:30, something that we can never have imagined last year, but now with the new social media platform Clubhouse, we will have a panel of grandchildren, just as Ashley said, grandchildren sharing the stories of their grandparents and what it means to be a grandchild, truly living those moments out of Lador Vador from generation to generation. And so we'll conclude with the Hatikva. And then just one public service announcement. If you are with the American Jewish University's Intro to Judaism, I'll ask if you'll stay on the call, as we'll have our post-program discussion as well. We rise as we face the flag behind me. And one last comment, I'm sorry, but in that ark, there are many Torahs. And one Torah that is new to Sinai Temple, but very old to the Jewish people, was donated here just several years ago by a family who was about to celebrate a bat mitzvah. And this Torah is very old. It comes from Germany. It was from a synagogue that turned into an orphanage during the Shoah, during the Holocaust. And the people in that synagogue took the Torah scrolls and put them down in a basement, knowing that they probably would never read from them again. But they had a hope. And the hope came true just 2 years ago, standing right where I am right now. A young woman at Sinai Temple celebrated her bat mitzvah. The first person to read that Torah in 80 years, right here, demonstrating that that hope is still alive. The cantor leads us, Hatikva.
Kol od balevav penima, nefesh Yehudi homiya, ulfate mizrach kadima, ayin letzion tzofia, od lavda tikvateinu, hatikva bat shnot alpayim, liotam chofshi be'artzeinu, Eretz Zion, Yerushalayim, liotam chofshi be'artzeinu, Eretz Zion, Yerushalayim.
May God grant God's people everywhere life, peace, simcha of joy, and shalom. And let us say, Amen. Thank you so much for joining, and please have a meaningful Yom HaShoah. Thank you.